Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of this year's North American Agroforestry Conference. Today's focus is land access to land and markets, and we'll be kicking things off with this morning's plenary on land access. Before we get started and we hand it off to our panel, I just want to do a few housekeeping things. Number 1, we are recording this session and all sessions, so you'll be able to access them after the conference, even the sessions you were not able to attend. And we ask everyone to follow some simple Zoom etiquette, which should be second nature by now. So everyone is muted, and we ask you to remain muted throughout the presentation. And please send all questions, comments, and links using the chat function. A reminder that conversations can continue by moving over to our Wonder Rooms after the session for continued discussion and lots of great opportunities to learn more and meet with our generous sponsors. You are invited to attend the Wonder Mixers beginning at 4:30 each night and for continued conversation and networking. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce the panelists for this morning's plenary, Rachel Armstrong of Farm Commons, who will serve as our moderator, Miah Ulysse, principal and founder of Rūted Solutions, and Cassidy Dellorto-Blackwell of The Land Connection. So thank you all for joining us this morning, and Rachel, I will pass the mic to you.
Oh, and Severine is here. So we have Severine on our panel as well.
Great, I'm gonna add the spotlight now.
Great. Okay. Well, hi, folks. My name is Rachel Armstrong. I am thrilled to be the moderator of today's session. I hope you have had a good conference experience so far and have learned lots. We are excited to share more with you about land access challenges and, more importantly, solutions that we see on the horizon and things we can do to help those solutions move forward. Before we get there, I want to be sure you know the expertise and experience of the folks who are on the line speaking with us today. So first thing I'm going to do is hand it to Miah to tell us a little bit more about herself. After that, we'll go to Cassidy and then Severine.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. My name is Miah Ulysse. Never forget, it's Mama Mia instead of Maya, and I am based in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I live on Anishinaabe land, and I'm really excited to be with you today to talk about land access policy. It's something that I nerd out about a lot, so I'm very excited to have been invited to this space. I consider myself an urban farmer. I don't grow for market, but I grow for communal uses, my own personal use, and I'm a budding herbalist. I helped to co-found a movement last year called Community, where we were able to grow or gather herbs to provide to the community during political unrest. And it's something that I love to do, is growing things and turning them into medicinal and purposes that can really heal and help your body, especially for Black folks in the Twin Cities. I am a facilitator and educator. A lot of the work that I do right now is focused on political education within BIPOC communities, creating space for people to understand how they can advance issues that they care about in their communities at the Capitol, how to find ways for land access to be a topic of conversation at different levels of policy, and for folks to understand how network building and coalition building are essential to work in topics around land access. So I'm a little bit of a policy nerd, but not all the way in. So I still don't believe in wearing suit and tie and pants at the Capitol. So yeah, I'm super happy to be here. I don't know what else you'd like me to say, but I feel like that's pretty comprehensive.
That's perfect. And I'm sure more of your background will come out in your responses. Cassidy, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. My name is Cassidy Dellorto-Blackwell. I am the Farmer Training Program Manager at the Land Connection, which is a pretty small farming and food system support organization located in Champaign, Illinois. The program I work for, pardon me, we do just all kinds of farmer education and support. Most of our work centers on diversification and risk management. And we really try to work to figure out ways to overcome barriers for our producers and create new opportunities. So we're working on developing like a micro granting program. This fall, we're gonna launch a matched savings account for third-party food safety certifications. working with Katie Adams on a project to support a small scale collaborative processing facility in central Illinois. And this fall, we are really going full force into land access. It was kind of the basis of our founding of the Land Connection 20 years ago, but due to a variety of granting priorities, it sort of became less of the forefront, but we're trying to bring it back to the forefront of the organization. And we're going to launch the Illinois Farmland Access Initiative this fall, 2021. But I am very much a newbie in this space, so I'm really looking forward to learning from Miah and Severine. I'm also excited to be here. Prior to coming to the Land Connection, I worked for the Sustaining Family Forest Initiative to work to increase private land or increase land management and conservation on private forest land. So I'm excited to be back with tree people. So thanks for having me.
Terrific. Good projects going on. Severine, we'd love to hear more about yourself.
So I think that Severine's having some issues not being able to hear others.
I can hear you now after trying so long.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, good to hear your voice. We can't see you, but hey, the voice is the important part. There you are. Now we've got voice and video. Tell us about yourself.
My name is Severine. I live in Down East, Maine.
We do
Is
have
it
an echo.
echoing for
If you have a headset or something like that, that probably will help. And I'm going to buy you a little time. I will jump in and introduce myself while Severine gets a little set up there. I'm your moderator, so I am joining you from northern Minnesota, where my family farmed on land that was stewarded by the Fond du Lac tribe of Ojibwe for many generations before we showed up. I direct Farm Commons. We help farmers resolve their own legal vulnerabilities in an ecosystem of support. I'm wearing this headset because I have 3 preschool-age children that like to play outside. So trying to minimize any, screams of joy, hopefully, that could come over the line. So bear with me if you do hear them. That's me. Severine, how about you?
Does it work better now?
Sounds awesome.
I farm in Down East, Maine. I'm a director of Greenhorns, a young farmers organization. And we've been going for 14 years, publishing the New Farmers Almanac, hosting parties and events and workshops and trainings. And obviously more in a cultural vein than in a technical service vein. But from Greenhorns grew Agrarian Trust, whose purpose is to support the incoming generation with land access. And I'm sure we'll talk more.
Awesome. So the first question that I would love to pose to our panel members, let's see, what is the most exciting innovation relative to land access that you are working on, or that you've seen other people working on and you think is really promising? I know we could talk for a long time about this. We're aiming for about 5 minutes each. Miah, you want to go first?
Sure. Sorry, are we talking about new strategies? I think
That's exactly it. What's the most exciting thing you're working on, or that you have seen other people work on? And of course, relative to land access for those that are not finding the land that they need to be successful.
Definitely. Sorry, you cut out. The internet over here is not the greatest. I think 2 parts to the question. Something that I've been working on that has been really exciting has been just the past year working with a few cooperatives in the state and across the country to just help and lift off and develop their work. I don't know if I actually said this of what I actually do. I think I described it, but didn't actually name it, but I'm the principal and founder of Rūted Solutions. It is my consulting company that I started after almost a decade of working in the food justice, policy, community organizing space, in really wanting to direct a lot of the energy that I have towards projects that fit my values, that fit the work that I care about, which is working with Black farmers, working with farmers of color around land access, around strategic development. I'm really great at taking someone's amazing pie in the sky idea and putting it into a place where we can operationalize it and put some meat on the bones and some definition. So that's a lot of the work that I do, is facilitating, the organizational development process, facilitating a lot of political education spaces, helping people to strategize on political campaigns that they might have or ideas that they want to turn into a policy at different levels of governance. So that is what I do. But I've been able to have the pleasure of working with a cooperative that is seeking to help Black farmers and just uplifting the work that they do on a national scale. And particularly in Minnesota, we have a very co-op rich environment, which is amazing in some ways. We have the highest number of cooperatives per capita versus any other state, which is great to have conversations at the Capitol because it's not a completely new it's not a new thing. But in terms of the level of investment that we've seen from the state, it has gone up and down over the years. And currently there isn't any specific fund or line item that is set aside for cooperative development within the Department of Agriculture. And so we've been working on just a cooperative grant that would help to boost up and lift off a lot of cooperatives, just because those startup funds can be really difficult for people. You think about cooperatives, especially when you think of BIPOC cooperatives, not everybody just has $20,000 laying around for a feasibility study or, $50,000 to pay a contractor to help with the organizational visioning for the next couple years. A lot of that time comes out of their blood, sweat, and tears. And so being able to have some of that support from the state level, I think would be really helpful for people who have these ideas but don't feel like they have the financial capacity to move them forward, which is a key thing, an issue that you see happening over and over again around land access. New strategies, I don't necessarily think that there are some new strategies. I've been seeing a lot more movement politically within state legislative bodies around providing down payment assistance for BIPOC or socially disadvantaged farmers, appraisal funds, which is great because if you've ever had an appraisal done for a house, like that's not the cheapest, but then think about having it done on a piece of land that you may not get approved for, that even if you are approved for, the seller may not even actually accept your offer. And so even if they accept your offer, they can still go back on the offer through contingency loopholes. So being able to help offset some of those costs that a lot of BIPOC farmers get stuck in due to systemic racism and systems of oppression, that even if they have that startup cost, can just lose it in a matter of weeks. So I've been really excited to see some of those strategies, particularly because even using grant funds to acquire land has been something that most state legislatures won't allow you to do. And even seeing the work that I had done past years on the urban agriculture grant program bill that I had worked on a few years ago, which was one of the first urban ag bills that was passed with dollars attached to it in any state legislative body in the United States, they wouldn't allow people to use it to procure land. And that's one of the biggest issues, is if you don't have land to grow on, how are you going to grow? So I think having these conversations pop up more openly and more frequently means that there is a shift coming in terms of what actually gets passed and appropriated in governing bodies. So those are, I think, a couple of things that I've either been working on or been really excited about.
Thank you. Thank you. The cost of land and the cost of procuring it, getting access to it, is such a big issue. And it's hard to find real innovations that cover some of those costs. So I appreciate that. Cassidy, we'll go to you next. I think you hinted at a couple of the innovative programs you're involved with in your intro. Would love to hear more here.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Rachel. And I would like to piggyback on Miah with the policy at state legislators. I think that is exciting that a lot of states are starting to put some line items in for like tax credits for transferring land to beginning farmers. I would love to see that kind of innovation happen in Illinois. A lot of our Midwestern neighbor states are doing that. Political action in Illinois is difficult. It's difficult nationally, but we are particularly difficult. So, I do have some hope that we can get some action in the state legislature, but I'm also being realistic about that. But the most exciting thing happening in my world right now is the fact that we are going to launch this Illinois Farmland Access Initiative this fall. Because in Illinois right now, we have no coordinated system to support farmers and landowners in connecting and finding each other and finding the support they need to make those connections be positive and impactful. Our organization has a classified ad section on our website that is a really hands-off system where folks can just post land, post what they want. But we're partnering with Nathan Alberg, who I see up in the gallery there, at the Liberty Prairie Foundation, he runs a Northeast Illinois land linking system, which serves, I'm gonna not get the number of counties correct, Nathan, I apologize. 10 counties in Northeastern Illinois to help connect farmers and landowners up there. And that's a really important area because it is close to Chicago, and that is definitely a dangerous situation for development and losing farmland up there. Nathan does a lot of great work, particularly with non-operating landowners and trying to figure out how to best support them to reach their goals. So we're really excited to have him involved with this project. We're also partnering with the Conservation Fund to get this off the ground. So this is really just about filling a void where there is, no service provision right now that fills the entire state of Illinois. And we are a big kind of strange state from north to south. So we have a lot of work to do. Our model itself is not particularly innovative. We spent a lot of time talking to other people around the country that have done this and trying to see what works. And we built our model off of pieces that we're taking from other people's ideas. So we're gonna have like a resource and service provider hub to help folks get connected to the technical services they need, lawyers, bankers, actual technical service providers for farmer training and things like that. We will hire land access navigators to support people through the entire journey. And we're gonna post those throughout the state. Nathan's at a certain advantage for like being much further along in this process. He has a lot of knowledge about what's happening in his neck of the woods, but we have a lot of learning to do throughout the rest of the state. We're gonna expand, we're gonna combine our classified ads in his website to serve not just those 10 counties, but all of Illinois. However, we're still figuring out how to deal with Chicago and Cook County. We're probably not going to work in urban land access, but partner with the organizations that are already working on that up there, like the Chicago Food Policy Action Council is really doing a lot of intentional work around identifying land that could be used for urban farming. So we're just trying to knit together all the pieces right now and figure out how to make this work. So it's all new for us. So it's all exciting. We've secured some funding to help us get this off the ground this fall, but we are still actively fundraising. So, and anybody in Illinois or Midwest, if you want to get involved, please feel welcome to reach out and join us and figure out how we can make this work.
Very cool. Thank you. Severine, I always feel like there's innovation coming from wherever direction you are. So I am excited to hear what you see as really exciting right now in terms of land access for folks.
Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
So I'm so grateful that the Savannah Institute would host this conversation about welcoming in an incoming generation, especially into regenerative ag that is as ambitiously resilient and shade producing, and that's different from just vegetable agriculture or CSAs. And it also provides us the opportunity to think, it's echoing in my ears. Oh, if I take out my ears, I can just talk. Okay. And that also means that we can think beyond the kind of agrosphere of the American family farm in terms of the pathways of entry, and that the project of restoration and reparations and resilience, which are essentially the work of surviving on this planet and restoring the function of our ecological commons, becomes a mandate for an incoming generation. And that the work of diversifying who and how and where that happens opens up a vast spectrum of opportunities. And really, the greatest opportunity is for our social democracy to show its merit in redistributing, in accompanying, in facilitating, in identifying, in mapping, in measuring, and in enabling that level of landscape transformation that is actually required of us in this time. So in this time of extreme heat, we need shade trees in the city. In this time of extreme drought, we need uplands restoration and reforestation. We need riparian restoration and reforestation. With dust and drought and drift and asthma, we need buffer strips. We need hedgerows. We need roadside strips. There's far beyond the kind of confine of our understanding of what an agricultural field might be in the school book, in a public school that's taught to a kid who lives in mostly an urban or suburban environment. We need a path of entry. And obviously I should speak for Agrarian Trust, and I do speak for Agrarian Trust, which is providing a model that is really outside the norm and is an expansion of the Community Land Trust project into the agrarian space, providing a commons that's held in trust and a 99-year lease for those who would access farmland. But I would just make sure to take up some of the time exploding out from, what is our kind of organizational mission to say and try to incite a broader discussion about a rainbow of pathways that we ought to be articulating and creating in this moment critically now. And so a massive mobilization during the last major ecological crisis of the Dust Bowl was called the CCC. And that created a pathway that was a feasible path, similar to the Peace Corps or the VISTA program or the Food Corps, that really was as straightforward as going into the armed forces, which, as you know, is a major destiny for rural people, is to go work, be part of the army. Roosevelt called it a tree army. And this was a group of young people who were trained in business skills, in craft skills, in restoration skills, and when deployed to do public works projects around the country. Obviously, the training part being facilitated by a federal agency means that they were able to, really pump through a lot of people. And right now we rely on apprenticeships and farmer training programs and service providers through extension and through nonprofits that are generating an extraordinary number of people who then have to run a slalom to, live their small farm or medium farm dream. And that is still far too few people who are able to make that slalom. So I think acknowledging, even though I've been part of this, organizing for young farmers movement for 15 years, and am myself a young farmer who knows a lot of young farmers, and there are young farmers, there are not enough, and they are not diverse enough, and they do not thrive enough. So I think we shouldn't let ourselves forget that. So if we had, a reshuffling and an acknowledgement that in a time of COVID, it's even more impossible to find a farm property that's accessible because you're competing with all sorts of mobile workers now. And it's like literally the worst moment in the world to try and buy a farm. That is really just a precursor to the larger climate reshuffle of resettlement of people moving away from places of fire and drought to places where there's, water and, a more habitable climate. And so those are trends, those are macro trends that aren't going to go away. But if we had greater incentives for leasing of land, people who are coming out of these apprenticeship programs and these farm training programs that we've all been working on for 20 years, you guys have been working on, I'm a young bug, but there's like Kathy Roof and all our elders who've been, and these incredible resources that have been made. If we were being real, we would be asking for tax-based incentives for landowners, non-farming landowners who control the majority of the territory of this country, to be inviting onto their land the young agroforesters who can work on the field's edge, the young grazers who can come between crops, that we would be stacking functions and stacking businesses much more intensively and not allowing our nation to be a monoculture of corn and soy and other large-scale monocultures, that we would have on our state and federal lands, on our water district lands, on our peri-urban lands, on lands that are, within the purview of regional planners and state parks administrators and federal land managers, that there would also be increased opportunity and incentive there for land access, that we would have restoration incentives attached to geography that we know a map of the country in great granular detail, and we know the places where we need tree cover. We could attach a bounty at a county level, at a state level, for the places that need restoration, and then say, dear landowner, if you sign up with a young farmer who will do restoration on your land in these places, there's a co-benefit for all parties. So these are just like little provocations to the conversation to say there's so much more work in this space that isn't yet a part of the discourse in carbon world, that isn't yet enough of the discourse in food security and biodiversity and succession. And I think the more we are able to fuse together our agendas around what land transition means, what largely is at stake for the nation in the way that land is transitioned and to whom and how, we're going to need a lot more humans working with us in this project.
Awesome, thank you. Severine, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and so my apologies for putting you on the spot, but I think it's a good time. You alluded to the agrarian commons and the model that's emerging there, and I would love if you could take a couple of minutes to introduce what is that model and how is it a new idea for land access?
Sure. Sorry, I start getting really on a roll. So Agrarian Commons is a community land trust that was founded, it started 7 years ago with a meeting in a circle of different stakeholders thinking together on what is really needed holistically for the entry of these, you could think of them as a young understory, a young orchard that needs to be nourished, an incoming generation that wants to repair and reforest a terrain that has become, it's an old farmer's world, let's be honest. And we love them and grateful for them. And we know that they've been working a long time and some of them deserve to retire earlier than they are and in dignity. And how are we going to accomplish that was kind of the question of that convening. And from that convening came a set of principles informed by the work of Elinor Ostrom, who was a student of the Commons and who worked to define the traits of commons-based natural resource management in fisheries and forestry, all over the world in indigenous land management contexts where a human community relied on an ecosystem for survival and had to accommodate their social and management systems accordingly. Because nature's law is the law. Even if we are operating in an economy, so too are we operating within nature. And often, as we have forgotten that, so too have we eroded our capacity to sustain ourselves. So we drew from that inspiration in the way that the social configuration would encircle the farm organism, the farmer, the farm family, the farm committee, the board, the governance board. I got a nice coffee given to me. And the legal structure, again, that surrounds it in order to hold the land in permanent trust, such that it can never be sold again. It can only be used for organic agriculture. And then, of course, the economic structure, again, to support that, meaning that it's essentially crowdfunded and that the land is purchased often at a bargain, and often in a way that's, using the current estate and easement systems and structures that have been set up to incentivize conservation of farmland, but really then removing that farmland from the commodity system, from the land commodity system. And if you've ever looked at a deed, you'll see it doesn't say emancipate on the top, it says indenture. And I think that that is the kind of underlying, that is what we're deconstructing here. And it's only one step along a long pathway. But if we live that experiment out in public, and now we're in 14 states, we're bringing on more and more farms, one in West Virginia, one in Montana. We just had the one in Maine that got a lot of attention for the Somali Bantu community, who are now the stewards of Little Juba Farm. But there are farms of all shapes and sizes that are sustained by this multi-layered, basically brand new container that we've co-created in order to host that farm in its full expression and in its in its succession. And I think that the point of doing it not only in ideological way or as a book, but doing it as a practice, is that then we have thousands of people participating and living into the question of how do we actually live in relation? How many wheelbarrows of wood chips and compost, and in my case, seaweed, are we bringing to these young trees? And what does it require of us as a community to sustain the farms that sustain us? That's the question we're asking. And the question we're asking is, will enough of us care, and will enough of us invest, and will enough of us participate to actually eat from the land and drink from the land that we live on?
Very cool. And I love the legal model that you guys have put together. I would say that as an attorney, though, and that the model documents are out there for folks to see how you've built that box that people can replicate and step into. Thank you. Miah, I'm going to turn back to you for the next question. Your solutions hinted at this, but now's our chance to get in a little bit deeper on what are the problems that folks are experiencing with land access. Money is one of those, but from your experience and in your community, I would love to hear more about that. What do you see as the most intractable barrier to good land access? A more hopeful way I could say that is, if a genie appears in front of you and says, hey, I'm going to solve one problem for you. I'm going to solve one problem related to land access. What would you pick?
I don't know if it's going to be, I don't think I could solve one problem. Honestly, because it's not one problem. It's like an entire country that has been built off of the backs of Black stolen labor and stolen Indigenous land. And I mean, if you can wave that away, then that would be like the root cause, honestly, is the fact that Black and brown bodies have been used against their will and exploited to be able to build a country that they can't even benefit from or work on a same or equitable playing field as the white counterparts that colonized this area. And so from the jump, like, if we want to like wave the wand and go back to maybe like the 14 to 1600s, we could do that. And that might be like a decent place to start. But in terms of the problems that we see in land access, especially from the Black community, it's at every stage and every level of the food system that a new farmer is trying to interact with. I mean, they say, oh, I want to learn how to farm. I don't have any skills, but I think this would be cool. I want to connect with the land, connect with my ancestors. So where can they go, within their state where they can learn to grow the things that they might want to grow, or to feel like when they go into a beginning farmers training program that they're not going to be the only Black or brown person there, or that they're not going to be tokenized or put on this like weird funny pedestal because they are one of the few people of color that is in that space. And then they learn the skills and they're like, great, how can I get access to land? And then they realize that there's community gardens in like the city areas that maybe are on city or transportation, plots. And so they go to find a plot to rent, and they realize that, maybe they have a waiting list. Like the plot that's near my house, 2 years ago, I joined a wait list in January, and a year later, I was able to be offered a plot. And so if you think about the timeline of even somebody being able to start as small as urban agriculture, being able to just get their start, a lot of people are starting to, find a way to connect to urban agriculture, which is amazing and great. But in terms of land access and farm access, that can be a really easy point that one would think for someone to access that land. But then when it comes down to the actual logistics of being able to do so, it can be really difficult. I know I'm a renter. I actually have to move in a couple weeks because my landlord tried to raise our rent $400. And so now I have to find a place to live in a market that's insane. And so I'm going to have to now drive to go to the plots that I have in St. Paul because I'm going to end up having to live in Minneapolis. And so when you think about, oh, it's 95 degrees out, you got to water, 4 times a week, a little bit more often if it's hot, then somebody's having to take that effort to go drive out. It's not something that's accessible nearby. And so even from an urban perspective, like there are these little barriers, but then when someone gets that larger dream of, okay, I'm ready to buy land, I think that people come into those barriers that get into the history of the Farm Service agency of being able to have that same access that white farmers have had from the USDA and other rural farming agencies that have controlled the funding mechanisms that people have applied for to be able to take advantage of lower interest farming loans. And so I have a friend, and she's gone through an app, like the application, the appraisal, like signing a purchase agreement with 3 different farms, a wonderful, amazing Black Somali woman here in Minnesota. And each time the landowner has backed out of the purchase agreement that they both have signed. And then she finds out later on that the same land was, sold off each time to a young white couple. And so I think it's irrefutable at this point to say that there is no racism in the food system, or just because you live in a blue area, there's no racism. Like, that's absolutely false. And so when I think about continuing the legacy of farmers for farmers of color, the idea of, a white farmer having a 7th generation farm honestly is not appealing to me, because even then, when they get to the point of selling their land, how likely are they to actually go through with selling it to someone who looks differently from them? And then even when that person of color, that Black person, gets to the application process, how much more scrutinized is their application? My mother has worked in residential and commercial lending and finance for 20 years. And even the stories that she's told me is appalling around all these little loopholes within the funding world that they can use to decline applicants for loans. And that's the same thing within farm loans, is finding ways and opportunities to either stall on loans, to have land appraised lower than it actually is valued for them not to be approved for a high enough loan to actually meet the appraisal value, so that they have to cover that gap, and just seeing all these stories. And so, people are working on, cooperative land ownership, which is great, because a lot of land trusts are popping up, and I love land trusts, but the concept of a land trust for a lot of Black folks is suffocating, because a lot of Black folks that descended from slavery were tenant farmers, and were constantly told by others that, oh, wait your turn, you'll get your time. Wait your turn, you'll get your land. 40 acres and a mule. We've got this grant program. We've got this loan program, socially disadvantaged farmers. But even when we look into the data, socially disadvantaged farmers as a legal term that the federal government uses at the USDA, that state governments like to use for parity for terminology, actually just benefits white women, because women are covered under socially disadvantaged farmers. And so people will say, wow, like there's this amazing program, they already have this designation for people of color, and it's not the same because it's not as specific as we need it to be. We need policies and procedures that are going to specifically note the harm that has done to Black people, to Indigenous people, to other people of color in this country, and to specifically hold space for that. And so when I hear like, oh, like the genie, like what one thing, it's like, it can't be one thing, or even what new strategies, because you can't research this to death. Like, it doesn't need to be a new strategy. People have been telling y'all, like, people have been telling government systems for decades exactly what we need to see. And then they ignore it because it's too hard, or because people would lose land, or because people would lose power, political power, or economic power. And then they turn a blind eye, and then they do the reset, and they say, oh, well, like, what do you need? And it's like, we literally told you what we need. And so a lot of this has been rising up to a call for reparations, to a call for people to not turn a blind eye to acknowledging the true hardship that Black farmers and Indigenous farmers and people of color in the farming world face, just to even get to the point of scaling up to even think about purchasing land. So I don't even know if that's actually helpful, but honestly, like, throw the whole, USDA financing system away, like throw away the Rural Finance Authority away in terms of their jurisdiction to give out loans, because honestly, like, they say that they have protections for people of color. They say they have anti-discrimination policies. I'm on the Emerging Farmers Work Group for the Department of Agriculture, and we have presentations from, the funders that fund the farmers in the state of Minnesota. And when we call them out and we ask them very plainly, what are you doing about all these, Black and brown farmers that are saying that they are suffering discrimination from you about being able to access land? Then all they can say is bureaucracy this, bureaucracy that, it's above my pay grade, then how does it change? And so if the people that are working within these agencies aren't at a grander level or a systemic level able to internally build the power to be able to make those changes, then they don't need to exist and new systems can be created. So maybe the magic wand is like, I'm going to create my own financing authority to help Black farmers get their funding. And I'm going to step off my soapbox now.
Your soapbox is exactly why this is here. So your words and your truth are exactly what we want to hear, and are so thankful for you to bring that to us today, and to put that forward for us. It's not always easy, and those are such important truths for everyone to be hearing. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it next to Cassidy. I'll admit, hard act to follow, but I'm going to put you on the spot and have you talk about problems that you see that you would wish to change.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Miah, I agree with you entirely. And Severine, you guys are like so great right now. You're being so inspirational, and the chat is going really great too. If it could be like the most simple thing that could be changed would probably be to like get rid of student loans and give everybody free healthcare. Those would be pretty easy barriers to get rid of. But like Miah said, like it's not one issue, it's like a whole set of issues. And I mean, I would also want to go back in time and change our entire history. That would make this a better system. I mean, I wish that we could have a culture of commons where we felt like sharing was important and that caring for each other was important. I really wish we could, bring agrarian trust to Illinois to help us set something up like that. That'd be awesome. But if I could, I feel like in Illinois, we're also like an incredibly flat state. So we are all corn and beans from top to bottom, because it's super easy for people to do that on large pieces of acreage. And so, I mean, I would at least want to roll back the clock on industrial agriculture, get rid of that system, because I feel like a lot of the power dynamics between farmers and corporations, bankers, and the USDA are just creating a system that keeps new producers out and food producers out, in our state at least, because the land is just so much more valuable to grow conventional corn and soybeans that are sent out of state to feed animals a diet that is not even something that they should be eating or can digest properly. So it makes really no sense. And it doesn't feel like something that we should be supporting, because it concentrates the wealth, it diminishes farmer income, it creates greater reliance on corporate products and markets. And before industrial agriculture came along, we were all, the world was farming at a human scale for thousands of years, in a way that was in harmony with nature, that was in harmony with communities. And I think a lot of, what is really nutty and scary about this whole situation is just our weird American connection to private property and to the power that brings, and to the greed and need to protect that at all costs. I think to Mia's point, I think there's a lot of baggage that people have around this that limits their ability to see clearly how beneficial what they have could be for the greater good, and scares them to open up to new ideas and new communities. So I have hope that we can change that. We need to just be changing kind of the entire way people think about things, and that's a big ask. But I do think we are in a really interesting position right now, especially with, you know, the past year we've had. I hate people saying when we get back to normal. I mean, normal was never good. We need to make it better. We need to make it, and I don't even want to call it a new normal. I want it to be something entirely different. And I feel like we have an opportunity now to really be working on these ideas and putting things into action that could be really beneficial for the long term. I think like Miah said too, like doing all this research and discussions, like we spend a lot of time planning before we get things on the ground, and we don't have the time to wait. I think we do need to be just like trying as many innovative solutions as we can and just seeing what works. Of course, you know, I work for a really small, resource limited, capacity limited nonprofit, and I'm collaborating with other people that are all in that same boat. And, you know, that makes it a difficult challenge to, you know, most of our work is funded by USDA, and sometimes we question whether we should accept that funding, you know, because of a lot of the historic issues that they have created and supported, to Mia's point. But it's a system that is really difficult to get out of. So, I mean, one thing that we are working on right now at the Land Connection is we're doing an organic grain apprenticeship program to try and at least move the needle on the chemically intensive agriculture we have in our state to start to transition large swaths of acreage to organic agriculture and to create new pathways for young farmers to get smaller acreage organic land that then they could potentially explore collaborative enterprises with, like agroforesters, with regenerative grazers, with market gardeners. Because once the land is being healed and moved off of its chemically intensive, you know, soil treadmill, we can start to rehabilitate it and potentially create new opportunities for like common practices, for developing cooperative enterprises. And I think, you know, then we can hopefully start to open up new pathways to thinking about how leases even work, and who they work for and how to make them work better, and whether ownership. I don't think owner operator is the only end all be all. I think there's a lot of options, and what works for one person in one place isn't necessarily going to solve all the problems. But yeah, I mean, if a genie came out and said, let's change all of our history, you know, that would be a start.
I love that this conversation is thinking about big problems and real problems. I think very often, you know, so many of us come from a place where we're asking someone else to pay for something to solve problems. We're asking for money, and those folks want small digestible problems that feel comfortable to them. And so that's what we end up getting money for. And those are the problems we end up tackling without the time and space to articulate what is truly in our way. So I am especially grateful for this time to think about those bigger, more significant things. Severine, your turn is next. The genie in the bottle, or you take that question wherever you want to take it to. We're talking about the real problems that that keep us from seeing land access happen. And you might be on mute, but we'd love you are on mute, but I don't know if you're ready to go, if you're ready to share your thoughts on that one.
Can she hear? Severine?
I don't know.
Severine.
I think not. We could chat at her in the box, but that might take a while too. Hey, that's cool. I'm going to come back around to Severine because our questions are all connected. Miah, right back to you. 6 months to a year. You have two ways to answer this question. On a 6 month to a year time frame, number one, what's on your to-do list to address these barriers, and or what task would you give others to help to begin to address the real problems? I'm very much looking forward to what you think on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I see my work in the next 6 months, continuing on with a lot of the political education work that I do, and just creating opportunities for farmers or people who want to get involved in organizing urban agricultural spaces to understand what opportunities are at the Capitol and how to connect with policy. It's not a sexy thing for most people. It's really aggravating. It's very frustrating. It's where you see a lot of like the deepest and darkest essences of white supremacy in our culture come out in very insidious ways. So it can be hard. And also, the point that a lot of people had noted in the chat, not like farmers are farming, and especially if they're outside of the cities, they don't always have time to just come down and advocate. And so I totally get that. And so I think that a call to action is around what spaces are you a part of that are connected to networks or coalitions, or even your farmers. I know that there are some farmers unions that are, trying to make amends with their past and finding ways to be more diligent and intentional about including and prioritizing the issues that BIPOC farmers face that are unique. But I would think about, ways that you can kind of capitalize on collective energy, because having run a coalition and a network, it's really a great space to be able to amplify the voices of partners. Oh, looks like Severine can hear. All right. Yeah, it's a great space to be able to amplify the voices of people who may not necessarily have the capacity to constantly be up there, because it's, it's a full-time job, and not all lobbyists are the devil. They actually can go in and do some amazing work. That is why some of us could even do the work that we're doing to this day. But I think just like finding ways to tap in and get involved and understand a little bit how your work might connect to policy, because a lot of decisions get made there that impact the work that we do. And if we're not there, then who's there, who's to say that it's not working for us? So I think that's my biggest call to action. And I'll probably just continue to nerd out on potential avenues and loopholes and ways to continue aggravating and pushing the Department of Ag to think more specifically on how they can make a positive impact in the Black and brown farmers that we have here in Minnesota.
Awesome, thank you. Severine, we'll go to you next. We missed you on the last round of questions, so you got two angles you can catch up with us on. The first is, what's the biggest issue that you see to equitable land access? And number two, what are on a 6 to 12 month timeframe action steps for you or for others here in our virtual room to start addressing those problems?
Well, now would seem to be the time to get pretty serious about this. And I think acknowledging that we have a cultural project here to contend with in terms of the way that we as a society relate to our food production, to our living planet, and to this, very critical moment in history. There's really is potentially the beginning of a contraction in COVID after a time of extreme extraction and expansion and globalization, and that contraction might be the beginning of giving birth to something really new and different, and to, I think, start our orbit of hope around the relationship we have to what wants to emerge, and to kind of maybe sometimes I think about grounding in my own kind of genetic destiny in recognition of this magnetism and momentum and grand and genius, evolutionary history that we are a part of as creatures of life, and that might give us and propel us the confidence that we need to undertake the level of change that's required of us. It's that level of existential survival in a time of climate crisis and consequence, and a sixth grade extinction, and peak everything. And so that also means that having extracted and having concentrated wealth to such an extent, I want to challenge those listening and those who aren't yet listening to be putting the philanthropy dollars to work, leveraging for state intervention in a system that's in major crisis. And that we have studied this issue of how do we do land succession, how do we do land restoration, how do we rebuild the infrastructures, ecological and otherwise, that will sustain our food systems. And this is a tremendous leverage point that we cannot pass up on. So I'm kind of always wondering, and the phone will ring, but with some serious high-powered summits to get our hit list that, you know, live inside of the Organic Coalition, live inside of NSAC, live inside of the National Young Farmers Coalition, that are the, you know, continuing thematic of, you know, within the Faithlands community, within the Commons community, within the land justice community, within the land loss community, within, you know, we know the theme, we have the song. We, I think, have to figure out how to make that the anthem of our mutual liberty. And that goes well with what I see bubbling on the horizon of what is hopeful enough to motivate people, because it's going to be work. It's not a solution if it doesn't involve a lot of work. We are dealing with degraded land. We are dealing with unhealthy children. We are dealing with contaminated air. We are dealing with a public health crisis. So I think expecting it to happen without work is unreasonable. Yeah, I have a tendency to get kind of ministerial, so I better.
Thank you. That's terrific. And you know, this is a plenary. This is a place for ministerial. It's a good word. Cassidy, last up, before we get to our question and answer time, and I'm hoping that there's going to be some good and hard questions in that chat box. Now's your time to start getting those in. 6 months, a year, what are you going to do? What do you think others should do to help address these problems?
I mean, I think everyone should listen to Miah and Severine and do everything that they say, because they're geniuses. You know, for us near term, obviously we are trying to get our little initiative off the ground. In the next 6 months, we will be launching it. We're going to be doing some hiring. You know, we're going to hire a person to manage the whole thing. We're going to hire what we've been calling an equity steward. We need, I mean, the group of folks that is working on this is a group of white folks, and we know that is not representative of our state. We need other voices to come to the table, and we want to make sure that we are honoring, you know, everybody in our state, and they're helping everybody get onto the land that is going to help them reach their goals. So we have a lot of work and a lot of learning to do, but as we've all said, we don't have the time to just like wait around for things to happen. So I do expect the next 6 months to be a lot of really long days, getting things off the ground, a lot of calls to Kathy Roof to see if we're doing it right, a lot of trying to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. But so, I mean, I'd say to anybody out there who wants to join us, please do. I can drop my email address in the chat here in a minute. Yeah, we need as many voices as we can get. We need great ideas. We need it all. I also am, you know, we need a lot of movement on policy. So I do think we need people to be going to the Capitol, to be pushing for these ideas. We need more voices supporting these ideas more loudly so that they are heard. I mean, obviously, big agribusiness has a lot of money to lobby and to push for their priorities in Congress. And so those are the priorities that get funded. And obviously that's not working for everybody. As Severine said, I mean, we are living in a time where our water, our air, our land is polluted and our food is polluted, and we're putting it all into our bodies constantly, and it makes no sense. We need to be coming up with a different way to do this. I'm hoping that, you know, Biden's 30 by 30 initiative has some real policy actions that will come to the forefront to help farmland protection, and they can actually fight off the narrative that anything that called farmland protection is a land grab, because that's not the case. But when people think that someone's coming for their land, then they just shut down any ability to have a conversation about it. the Illinois Environmental Council here in Illinois is working on developing their own priority platform for 30 by 30. And I do hope that that's going to include a lot of discussion about how we use our farmland, how we use our public land in Illinois. I mean, our Department of Natural Resources owns quite a bit of farmland, and that farmland is all leased to predominantly conventional corn and soybean farmers. And that feels like a really unjust system. If we have this opportunity for the state to be providing access to a variety of farmers, they should be. And it also makes no sense why you would allow a lot of chemicals to be sprayed on the lands that you're trying to protect as your mission as the Department of Natural Resources. So that also, that's a system that I feel like we can hopefully affect some change on. Right now, it's a black box on how it all works. So, I mean, I'm trying to needle my way in and figure out what's going on and if we can make it something better. But, you know, again, we are a bunch of small, scrappy nonprofits. And, you know, we need to make this happen fast. And I always worry about people getting burned out before we make it to the finish line. So, you know, we just need more. We need to spread the work out across everybody. We need to get everybody at the table to be contributing to make it easier for everybody to make it happen. And listen to all ideas and be open to all possibilities.
Awesome. Love it. All right. So now we're moving into the question and answer phase. Folks, you've got 3 incredible, innovative, brilliant minds in front of you. I know you've got questions. Katie, has anything come in yet?
Yeah, we had another great kind of like magic wand question was around if you were to wave our magic wand and land became available in rural areas, how attractive really is it for farmers seeking land? Is it realistic to ask urban farmers to move 2 hours away where there is land but little to no markets close by? This is a great question that gets to different communities than one folks are currently living in now.
Take it away, Severine.
Yes. I just tell you a little anecdote. Sometimes I feel like the biggest practice as an organizer in my own life has been traveling around and kind of studying the phenomenology as it occurs of these time horizons where small farm worlds morph over time. And so I'm going to tell you a tiny story about the Adirondacks, where I used to live, where I still have my herb drying trays that were originally part of a Grange co-op that did cover crop seed during the time of Louis Bromfield and the Malabar farm, when pre-fertilizer lay crops and clovers and bird's foot trefoil were grown in the Adirondacks to be sold as seed to farmers around. And that was precisely because there wasn't a lot of population there. The Adirondacks are the least populated part of New York State. They have, the Adirondack Park is 40% of the territory of New York State and only 4% of the population. It's a zone 3 climate. It's far away, you know, it's even 3 hours away from Albany, which is not a very big city to begin with, and is, you know, not particularly, it's a harsh growing environment. And yet in Essex, New York, there was a amazingly wild and ambitious farm project got started called Essex Farm, which you can read about in a really good book called The Dirty Life by Kristen Kimball. And they're farming with horses. They're growing a full season diet year round, diverse vegetables, grains, maple syrup, lard, you know, all the meat products, milk, full season, full diet, free choice CSA. So everyone who's a member just takes what they need to eat and doesn't even measure it. And that framing, which is made possible by basically a gift of very affordable land, a long-term lease that became a sale, attracted such dynamic, amazing people that those dynamic, amazing people came to work at Essex Farm, got really buff, became like Olympiads of the impossible, and then all started farms themselves. And so in a town that hadn't had a new farm in, I think, 50 years, you have now, I think, 17 new farms in the last 10 years. And that's in a place that has a lot of the qualities that you might say, like they, didn't have that many young people. They don't have much social life. You have to catch a ferry, and then it's still 40 minutes to Burlington, Vermont, to go and get a beer. They didn't at the beginning have a butcher or a baker or now they do. Now they have a baker and they have a butcher and they have a really great brewery, and that has all grown up alongside an infusion of youth and moment and what they say, we farm with unicorns or something. No, they have a really silly motto about unicorns, or we farm with magic. Anyway, so I guess I would just say that having spent now 15 years in celebration of and organizing for, guidebooks for and with, and literary journals for and with the young farmers movement, and having been swept up in this totally irresistible culture of the young agrarian and incoming agrarian world, I'm always dumbfounded by this question coming up over and over and over about, but of course young people don't want to farm, of course young people don't want to do the work, of course it will be alienating and lonely. And it's like, yeah, it is totally. And also what I have experienced in this time is that once people become a part of farming, they don't want to give it up. It's worth the heartbreak. And so the end of my part of the answer.
Love it. Other contributions from Miah or Cassidy? That's cool. And we can always go to Katie. More questions.
This next question speaks more to policy. What are the current policy mechanisms to inspire current landowners to transfer to next generation growers, farmers, and ranchers?
Can whoever wrote that maybe I don't know, either text or get off mute to clarify what you mean by mechanism? Are you talking about what policies are in place, or once the policy is passed, systems of implementation?
And Katie, if you've got another question where we let that person clarify. Okay.
Are there policies in place, policy approaches, ways to use policy to address? Okay, yeah, much more clear. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely policies in place that could approach, there are policies that I've seen that are on more of the farmer side. So state of Minnesota, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, started and passed the new farmers tax credit. And I think in the first year it got $10 million, which is unheard of. And it only took one legislative session, to my knowledge, to pass this through. But it gives new farmers a tax credit. So that's helpful on their side. But I think you're talking more about obviously the actual incentive for an existing landowner to transfer over land to someone that is not their kin. And I haven't seen a ton of those incentives. I think that you could do some kind of tax credit, I'm sure. But if they transfer over if they're transferring over the land at some point, it's not necessarily going to be beneficial because they might not be, operating their farm business. So it could be a one-time tax credit for the calendar or fiscal year that they're operating under. But in all honesty, obviously human beings like incentives, we like stickers and cookies and gift cards and honorariums and money and tax breaks. And I'd love to think that people would do it more out of the goodness of their heart and them understanding and being more connected to how it makes and creates a more diversified farming ecosystem, and not just being enough in their big old heart to transfer over land to someone else. I know that's not always the case, but maybe even opening up and having conversations, because I'm sure it, you know, it happens in urban spaces and it happens in rural spaces and even in suburban spaces. Is, you know, you move out there because this is the life that you want, and it might have been different than your parents' life or the life that you grew up in. And then you have kids and they're like, absolutely not, I'm going back. And so, you know, obviously you see a lot of rural drain. It can be hard to get urban farmers up into rural spaces as well. But having conversations like, hey, if you don't have somebody in your family that wants to take over your farm, cool, like give the land over to someone who does want to take it over. And how can you work to decrease those barriers? Like maybe it's a contract for deed, and you don't have to go through, or you can bypass more strict and stringent funding mechanisms. But I don't know. I mean, I think that that could be a potential like avenue, is just opening up some of those conversations, because I know succession planning is not the greatest in, you know, most industries that are multi-generational, that might potentially have an endpoint if they don't have someone that wants to take it over within their family. But also, you know, having conversations around what that means. You know, if everybody's a family farmer right now, that's great, but with less than 1% of farmers nationally being Black in the United States, that means less than 1% of Black farmers have anything maybe to give to and pass off to their offspring, because most of those Black farmers don't own their land. And so when we think about succession planning, I think there's a conversation about racial equity. And sometimes I do feel funny and weird ethically about constantly having to put a policy or some kind of like cookie in place for people considering racial equity in succession planning or in the next stage of the land's life, because the land's been there a lot longer than the farmer.
If I can step in with a tiny soapbox of my own, the land access question, policy solutions, whether this conversation is more about socioeconomics than about land access, I would reroute us to a fact. We don't have a land access problem in America. The system is working as planned. There's all the land available in the world for someone who has enough money to buy it. The only problem is we don't have the money, and that's it. And, you know, we can talk about fundamental, you know, how we should own this land, but we don't have a problem if we have money. So a conversation about who has the money and why people don't is a socioeconomic question, and that is the land access challenge. So, so for me, you know, policies about how do we incentivize or how do we, you know, create new models. If it doesn't come down to money, it doesn't solve the problem. So tweaking around the edges is just not going to get us where we need to go until we can talk about who has resources and how those are shared. So for me, that is a land access conversation, and, you know, a bit of you know, elephant in the room, so to speak, about what is the actual nature of this problem. So so my 2 cents on policy and money.
I'll just jump in right before Severine, because I'll be quick, I promise. I agree with you completely, Rachel. And to trying to figure out like what is helpful for landowners to incentivize them to transfer. I mean, there are a lot of people exploring different kinds of lease structures that are like lease to own structures that would provide income for landowners. I know there's a farmer in our neck of the woods that is working with a landowner on a transfer system that is feeding into her having an IRA, so she has a retirement income once this transition is complete. And I mean, I think there are a lot of things to explore like that. If you are a landowner and you have a farmer that you're interested in working with to pass it on, you know, work with them to figure out what is going to be the solution, what's going to make the most sense for the both of you to make it a situation that works out. You know, talk to a banker, talk to a bunch of bankers. Get a variety of opinions and ideas on what could happen, because the policy mechanisms aren't always guaranteed. I mean, they're, you know, states put in a line item for these sorts of things for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then sometimes they just disappear. And then what happens? We need to figure out other solutions. So I'll let Severine go.
Yeah, I Well, I also wanted to just make sure to credit Rachel with her extraordinary service in this work of making a trove like an Aladdin's cave of usefulness for people who are doing this work of, you know, wiggling through an impossibility that is the consequence of a farm policy, as you described, that privileges money above all else, and that makes it very, very challenging. And also that the majority of what you see on the ground in terms of what's working, and, you know, who is presenting at farm conferences about adaptive seed breeding, and who's presenting about, you know, checking your lammy's eyeballs. It's people who wiggled through the impossibilities together and got it deep roots that whoever the stakeholders were that it would allow them enough land access to be leading our movement. And if you look behind all of the leadership in all of the threads of regenerative ag and agroecology, who have a land story and who have confronted the drama of that in whatever way, whether it means on the handshake basis, being completely insecure, having a really lucky situation, having a there. Whenever you see someone leading in agriculture, and that story needs to become a lot easier. Obviously, that's the whole point of this. That's the whole point of this panel. I would just say agrarian trust has been prepared to provide the farm organism the space it needs to perform its social, ecological, and nutritional function is limited by capital. You know, if we had $20 million come in, we could do $20 million with people approaching who would have a farm bought, identify the farm that they want, to be part of the us, which is the agrarian commons. And, you know, we are constrained, we're constrained by capital. And so that, yeah, who would know that land reform is, yeah, it takes a lot of fundraising. Wait a minute, that was.
And Severine, your audio is breaking up a bit, so so I think we will.
Maybe
I don't think it's just let me know if it's just me. I can't hear Severine anymore. No. Okay.
Me too.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll see if the interwebs catch up with you over there. Katie, we still have what, 12 minutes here for questions.
Great. One that came in was specifically around agroforestry. And the question is asking each panelist if they can share a profile of an agroforestry farm, or if there's not one in your immediate network, another type of farm that is especially inspiring in terms of both the farming and the land access approach. Severine, I know you mentioned Essex Farm as one of those prime examples, but Miah or Cassidy, it might be great to hear about a farm that you find particularly inspiring.
You know, when I saw that question come through, I was like, that Katie can answer that question better than anybody. I mean, I feel like inspiring land transition story is, you know, the Mary Wyatt story that I mentioned, that Julia talked about in the chat too, that somebody who was motivated to turn their money into land for a farmer to make it farm sustainably and responsibly. You know, it's unfortunately a lot of the, I mean, unfortunate, fortunate or not, most of the farmers around here are not, they didn't get their land by any means except, you know, inheriting it or having come from an agricultural background. So, I mean, I don't know that that's completely inspirational. It's just pretty standard. I wish I had a better story. I think that was Nathan. I feel like you probably have a good story too, Nathan, actually.
Something that I'll just note and highlight in is I have a good friend in Minnesota, and her name is Naima. And so her farm is called Naima's Farm. And then she's also the founder of the Somali American Farm Association, which we have a pretty significant Somali population in the Twin Cities. And so when I think of inspiring, I mean, it's like, you know, obviously like, people are like, oh, Soulful Farm, and like all these like bigger farms that are really amazing, inspiring, and like, yes, but also just, I mean, the struggles that people go through to get land access, you know, and even for Naima, having her own agricultural knowledge, her own cultural connection to food, as we all do, and having to work through passive aggressive barriers to have access to land, and she's still out here farming, she's still out here connecting with her community, I think is really amazing. So I think that that is one that I would note. But she's not in, there's no agroforestry. I'll just note that. She's not, yeah, not a forester. That'd be great.
Use that comment box, folks, and put your own links in there.
I just wanted to give a call out for a couple different things. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Number one, I saw Omar on here, and I wanted to just remind everyone who hasn't tuned into this amazing paradigm called Prairie Strip to please tune into it. It's basically a very wonderful concept that nature connected functions better than nature disconnected, and that we can have habitat strips that cross our landscape along contours, along power lines, along roads, and basically that there's a almost a new logic being articulated across the landscape that allows for hundreds of species to persist, and that strategy of finding a small way to begin the conversation to open up a place where cows could walk and move and think strategically on how to intervene from a monoculture corn and soy system into a grazing based system, into a system that includes rotation, that includes trees, that includes animals and sentience. You know, that there's like a chink, there's the first move. So I feel like that's a major inspiration in terms of thinking these problems through. Another thematic to just drop into the last remaining mix is I've recently begun to be well, I basically learned that we have a mine that wants to start in my watershed, and as a result of learning how to fight the mine and participate in regulatory intervention, I met all these 8-year-old people who are passionate activists who are literally liquidating their real estate in order to, pass a moratorium on mining in the state, because they recognize that that's the biggest impact they can make on the world. And it gives me the shivers, actually. I've been hanging out with a lot of really practical, wonderful people.
You're on mute, I think.
Oh, yeah.
What people do in the end of their lives with the money that they have seems to be at stake also in a pretty big way, because the majority of the money is held by people who are in the last part of their life in this country. And the work that is to be done will by and large be work that is done by people who are in the beginning of their life. And so we have an opportunity to help justice occur and to commit to the long future that we hope for our whole civilization or our whole society or our whole culture. And I hope that we can get that level of conspiratorial collaboration between the generations.
Awesome. 6 minutes left. Do you think we should tuck in one more question, or do we have other thoughts? Miah?
Could I address one of the questions that was in the chat?
Let's do it. Yes.
Okay, there was a question that someone had asked way up in the chat around just like, I think maybe racial equity within land trusts, and I want to scroll up to find it because I feel like it was like a longer question.
I can send that.
Okay, I found it. It keeps moving. So the land trust model doesn't always resonate with farmers of color because it doesn't offer opportunity and real ownership and everything that goes with this. So basically, like, do you think a model that upends private land ownership has a place, and what form would it need to take to be responsive to historical racial inequities? I mean, I will say I may not necessarily be the person who's going to dissolve land ownership in the United States. That's not my fight. If that's somebody else's fight, go for it. But when I think about, if this is the system that we're operating right now, I could either be, anti, private land acquisition, and then know that my community is still going to continually miss out on being able to have something to pass down to others. And that as we see population rising and climate, things around climate and development rising, that we're just going to continue to be pushed out. And so I think that, private land ownership from the perspective of having one person at its nucleus can have its own problems, but I do think that there are other models out there, or even just, I don't have an issue with land trusts in themselves. I think the hardest part is that usually it's some really amazing, good meaning white people that start a land trust because they have the time, the access, the funds, the capital, and or the privilege to be able to do so. And then they say, we want to do this for the brown folks. And then the brown folks are like, well, I mean, do we want to work with you? How are we included in this picture? And I think that just creates a power dynamic that cannot be replaced. And so I do think that there are land trusts where people are, like, from a truly integrated perspective, trying to just build community power and look at it through a point of conservation and access. But I do think that is oftentimes what I see within land trusts, and that there is a distrust within community because, oftentimes land trusts end up being nonprofits, and then a lot of that power still can come from the board legally. And so who is the board made up of? And there can be this, illusion of power of, we have this land trust, we have 500 acres for 99 years, and that's great. But like, when you think about who could really take that away, if there was an interaction that went bad, or, people wanted to do this with the land, but somebody wanted to do that, who would have the power and the ability to be able to make those decisions? Oftentimes it's not actually the Black and brown people. And so I think that's the issue that I'm seeing with land trusts that aren't started by and for communities of color. But when the model is applied to communities of color that are uprooting and building those systems for themselves, then it's a great model. It just, I think can give a lot of people in this movement the historical trauma vibes of tenant farming, of, oh, somebody else owns this land, or we own this land and we're all in it together. But this is your spot, and you aren't necessarily, always guaranteed that this is your place to be able to build and to grow it and to invest into. And I'd rather opt into a cooperative model where you can find ways to parcel out land where people still have ownership and connection, and that their work and the success of their work is interwoven. And I think the interdependence in a healthy way is a little bit more of a healthy model that encourages more democracy in an actualized format, versus sometimes when land trusts default to a nonprofit. And then, do you have a grant that you have to do programming for? What if people don't want to do programming? What if they just want to farm? And just kind of can lead you down a rabbit hole of potential issues. But I did link it, I'm going to link it again. A really, really amazing group of Black folks are starting and took over this healing restorative hermitage place that was about 2 hours away from the cities. And it's called the Root Springs, I believe. And it's completely centered on Black queer liberation and justice. And a lot of the land is has conservation, so they can't, expand, or they can't build new buildings, but there is some growing space available. And then it's a part of a Black land trust that's being started. And so, Black land trust, super about it. Random land trust that doesn't have true deep embedded connections to communities of color, where it's enough to actually acknowledge that power dynamics and political dynamics and wealth dynamics and time dynamics can be leveled off, I'm not sure about.
Thank you. That was a great question to wrap up with. We are at the end of our time, and thank you so much, Miah, Cassidy, and Severine, for giving us your time today and sharing your thoughts. It is definitely a blessing to be able to hear where you're at and what you are seeing. And I'll hand it to Katie for any last words before we head out.
Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. This was inspirational and shifting work as we go into the rest of our day today and then the rest of our steps forward throughout our work. So thank you again to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing everyone in sessions for the rest of the day.